August 17th, 1945. Rabaul, Papua New Guinea. The building was shaking, not from bombs this time, but from something else. Silence. The terrible, unnatural silence that followed years of war noise. We sat in the darkness, 15 women huddled together, listening to footsteps approaching outside. Foreign footsteps, English voices, American voices. They were here. The enemy was here, and we knew what happened to women when armies arrived. I am Hanako Tanaka, 23 years old, from a poor farming village in Kumamoto Prefecture. 4 years ago, I believed I was being given an opportunity to serve my country with honor. 4 years ago, I believed the recruiters who came to our village promising factory work, good wages, and a chance to support the war effort. 4 years ago, I was still naive enough to believe in honor. August 17th, 1945. If I die today, let it be known. My name is Hanako Tanaka. I was deceived. I survived. I existed. If you think you understand W2N from only one perspective, this story will change everything. Subscribe and comment. What happened next showed me that humanity can exist even in the darkest places. You need to hear this. 4 years. That's how long it had been since the recruiters came to my village in 1941. I was 19, the eldest daughter of a poor farming family with too many mouths to feed. When the well-dressed men from the city came with promises of factory work in Southeast Asia, good wages, safe conditions, opportunity to send money home, my parents saw it as a blessing. You'll be making uniforms, they said. Essential war work. Your country needs you. My father was proud. My mother cried but called it duty. My younger siblings looked at me with envy that I would see the world beyond our small village. I left believing I was doing something honorable. The truth revealed itself slowly, in stages, like a nightmare you can't wake from. First, we weren't taken to a factory. Then we learned there would be no uniforms to sew. Then they explained what our essential war work actually meant. Then they made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Then they took our names and gave us numbers. I became number 9. I won't describe the details of what the 4 years were like. I won't turn suffering into spectacle or trauma into entertainment. I will only say this. They convinced us we were serving our country. Then they stole everything that made us human and replaced it with shame so deep it lived in our bones. The system was called Ianfu, comfort women. The euphemism made it sound voluntary, even noble. The reality was enslavement, though they never called it that. We were Japanese women serving Japanese soldiers, which somehow made the shame worse. This wasn't enemy soldiers violating us. This was our own countrymen, our own military, systematically using us and calling it patriotic duty. The comfort station in Rabaul, a military base in Papua New Guinea, housed 15 Japanese women. We'd been brought from different prefectures, all deceived in similar ways. Some believed they were going to be nurses. Some thought they'd work in military administration. Some, like me, expected factory work. All of us learned the truth too late. The routine was systematic, bureaucratic, dehumanizing in its efficiency. We had quotas. We had schedules. We had medical inspections to ensure we could continue working. Everything was documented, organized, made official through paperwork and stamps and military protocols. It was slavery dressed up as duty. Some women tried to resist at first. They were punished or threatened with punishment to their families back home. Some women asked to go home. They were told the war wasn't over. Their service was still needed. Maybe next year. Some women got sick or injured. They were kept anyway, until they were too damaged to be useful. Then they simply disappeared, sent away to places we never learned about. I learned to survive by becoming nothing. No thoughts, no feelings, no expectations. Just endurance. That was the only way to last 4 years. By August 1945, we knew Japan was losing. The Americans had taken island after island, moving closer to the homeland. Rabaul, once a major Japanese base, had been bypassed and isolated. Supply lines were cut. Food became scarce. Medical care became non-existent. The soldiers stationed here were trapped, forgotten, slowly starving, and we were trapped with them. On August 15th, we heard the radio broadcast. Emperor Hirohito's voice announcing surrender. The war was over. Japan had lost. For the first time in 4 years, I felt something. Hope. Maybe surrender meant we could go home. Maybe the nightmare was finally ending. Then reality set in. We were thousands of miles from Japan, on an island controlled by enemies who now had every reason to hate us. We were Japanese nationals in a war that Japan had lost, working for a military that had committed atrocities across the Pacific. We were women with no protection, no resources, no way home, and we'd heard the stories. What happened to women when armies changed hands, when the winners took control, when there was no law and no mercy. The Japanese military had committed terrible acts against women in occupied territories. We expected the Americans would do the same to us. They'll kill us. One woman whispered that night. Or worse. We should kill ourselves first. At least we'd choose our own deaths, some women agreed. They'd seen what Japanese soldiers had done to Chinese and Korean women in occupied territories. They assumed Americans would be the same, or worse, in revenge. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live through what I expected was coming either, so we waited in the darkness of the comfort station, listening to American voices outside, waiting for the doors to break open, waiting for the violence we were certain would come. The door opened slowly, not kicked in, not violently, just opened. Light flooded the dark room. Tropical sunlight so bright after days of darkness that it hurt to look at. We shielded our eyes, huddled together, trying to make ourselves small. A man's silhouette stood in the doorway. American uniform. Tall. Armed. This was it. This was the moment we'd been dreading. Jesus Christ, the man said in English, his voice thick with shock. There are women in here. They're just kids. More voices behind him. More Americans. They were speaking rapidly in English. Words I couldn't understand, but tone I could. Surprise, confusion, maybe anger. We cowered, waiting for whatever came next. Then the first American stepped fully into the room, and I could see his face. He was young, maybe 25, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His expression wasn't rage or lust. It was horror and pity. "Do any of you speak English?" he asked, trying to make his voice gentle, though we could hear the shock in it. Silence. We were too terrified to respond. He tried again in broken, heavily accented Japanese. "We, American, we no hurt. You, safe now." One of the older women, number 3, I'd never learned her real name, found the courage to speak. "You are going to kill us?" "What? No." The sergeant looked stricken. "No, ma'am, no one's going to hurt you. We're here to help. We're liberating this base. You're prisoners, right? You're free now." Free. The word didn't make sense. Free meant choice. Free meant human. We hadn't been free or human in 4 years. "Please," the sergeant said, his voice breaking slightly. "We need to get you medical attention. Food, water. You all look. When's the last time you ate?" We stared at him, unable to process what was happening. This was supposed to be violence. This was supposed to be revenge. This was supposed to be punishment for being Japanese, for being women, for being convenient victims when power changed hands. Instead, he was asking when we'd last eaten. 3 days, number 3 whispered. No food, little water. The sergeant turned and shouted something in English. Within minutes, more Americans appeared. Some with medical bags, some with canteens, some with ration packages. They moved slowly, carefully, like approaching frightened animals. One medic, a young man with a Red Cross armband, knelt at a safe distance from us. "I'm a medic," he said in terrible Japanese. "I help, check health, give medicine. Is okay?" We didn't move, couldn't move. The cognitive dissonance was too great. These were supposed to be the enemy. They were supposed to hurt us. Everything in our 4 years of experience had taught us that men in uniform meant pain and fear and powerlessness. But these men were asking permission, using gentle voices, keeping distance, offering help. It didn't make sense. The sergeant tried again. "We're going to set up a medical station outside. When you're ready, no rush. Take your time. Please come out. We have food, water, medical care. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Then they left. Just left. Didn't force us. Didn't threaten us. Didn't take what they wanted. Just left the door open and stepped back, giving us space and choice. We sat in stunned silence for a long time. "It's a trick," one woman said. They're luring us out. Maybe, Number 3 said quietly. Or maybe they're telling the truth. Either way, we can't stay here. We have no food, no water. We'll die if we stay. She was right. We were trapped between certain death from starvation and uncertain fate with the Americans. At least with the Americans, there was a chance. Slowly, hesitantly, we began to move toward the door. Outside, the world was painfully bright. We'd been in darkness so long that sunlight felt aggressive. I squinted, trying to adjust, trying to understand what I was seeing. The Americans had set up a field station in the shade of palm trees, tarps strung up for shelter, medical supplies laid out on tables, water containers and food supplies clearly visible. A dozen American soldiers were there, but they stayed back, giving us space, not approaching, unless we approached them first. The sergeant who'd found us stood near the medical station. When he saw us emerging, he smiled. Not in that way men had smiled at us for 4 years, but with what looked like genuine relief. "Thank you for coming out," he said through a translator they'd found, a Japanese-American soldier who spoke both languages fluently. "My name is Sergeant Miller. This is Corporal Yamada. He'll be translating. We're here to help you. But first, we need to understand your situation. Can you tell me who you are? Who we were. Not what we were. Not what number. Who?" Number 3 spoke for all of us, her voice shaking. We were Ianfu, comfort women, for the Imperial Japanese Army." I watched Sergeant Miller's face carefully, waiting for the disgust, the judgment, the moment when he realized what we'd been and decided we deserved whatever happened to us. Instead, his expression filled with sadness and anger, but the anger seemed directed elsewhere. "Not at us. You were forced into this," he said. Not a question. A statement. An understanding. "We were told we would have factory work," I heard myself saying, speaking for the first time. "We were deceived. Then we had no choice." Miller nodded slowly. "Enslaved. You were enslaved by your own military." The word hit like a physical blow. Enslaved. We'd never been allowed to call it that. It had always been service or duty or comfort work. Euphemisms that made it sound voluntary. Honorable even. But enslaved was the truth. "Yes," Number 3 whispered. "Enslaved." "Then you're victims," Miller said firmly. "Not criminals, not collaborators. Victims. And we're going to treat you accordingly, starting with medical care. May our medics examine you? Check for injuries, illness, malnutrition? Everything will be documented but private. Female nurses from Australia are coming to assist. No one will hurt you. I give you my word, his word, the word of an enemy soldier." And somehow, impossibly, I believed him, because nothing in his behavior matched what I'd learned to expect from men in uniform. Everything about this moment was wrong according to my 4 years of experience. And that made it the first right thing I'd encountered in all that time. "Yes," I said quietly, "you may examine us." The medical examination was thorough but gentle. The Australian nurses, 3 women who'd been stationed with Allied forces, treated us with a combination of professional efficiency and deep compassion. They documented injuries and illnesses with clinical precision while speaking to us with words that acknowledged our humanity. "You've been through hell," one nurse said to me as she checked my vitals. "I can't imagine what you've survived, but you're safe now. We're going to get you healthy and get you home." Home. Japan. The country that had deceived us, enslaved us, used us, then abandoned us when the war turned. Did I still have a home there? Would my family accept me back after what I'd become? Could I ever go back to being the girl who'd left the village 4 years ago? I didn't know. But the nurse's words suggested she believed it was possible. She believed I could have a future beyond this. After medical examination came food. Real food. Not the scraps and inferior rations we'd been surviving on for months as supplies dwindled. Rice, vegetables, canned meat, fruit, bread, food given freely, with no expectation of payment or service. I held the tin plate in my hands and couldn't move, couldn't eat, just stared at food that had been given to me by enemy soldiers who called me a victim instead of a number. "It's okay," Corporal Yamada said gently in Japanese, sitting at a respectful distance. "Take your time. Eat slowly. Your body needs to adjust." "Why are you being kind to us?" I asked, the question bursting out before I could stop it. We are Japanese. Your enemy. We served your enemy's military. Why don't you hate us? Yamada was quiet for a moment. My parents are from Hiroshima, he said finally. I was born in California, but I'm Japanese American. When the war started, my family was sent to internment camps in America, imprisoned just for being Japanese. I know what it's like to be blamed for things you didn't do, to be punished for your ethnicity rather than your actions. He paused, then continued. But more than that, we were briefed on what the comfort women system is. We know it's slavery. We know women were forced, deceived, coerced. You didn't choose this. You're victims, and we don't punish victims. We help them. Tears I'd been holding for 4 years suddenly broke free. I sobbed while holding that tin plate of food, all the pain and shame and relief pouring out at once. Yamada didn't tell me to stop crying, didn't tell me to be strong. He just sat there, giving me space to feel what I'd been denied the right to feel for so long. Eventually, the crying stopped. Eventually, I ate. The food was simple, but it tasted like hope. That night, we slept in a tent the Americans had set up for us, clean with cots and blankets, with guards posted outside for our protection rather than our imprisonment. It was the first night in 4 years we'd slept without fear of what the next day would bring. I lay awake, staring at the canvas tent roof, trying to process everything that had happened. The Americans had found us. They'd given us medical care. They'd fed us. They'd treated us like human beings with names instead of objects with numbers. They'd done everything I'd been told enemies never did. They'd shown the mercy and humanity I'd been told only existed within Japanese culture. They'd treated us better than our own military had. Every belief I'd held, about us versus them, about racial superiority, about who was civilized and who was barbaric, had been shattered in a single day. Are you awake? Number 3's voice came from the darkness. Yes, I whispered back. I can't believe this is real, she said. I keep waiting to wake up and find it was a dream. Or a trick, that tomorrow they'll show their true faces. I know, I said. But what if it's not a trick? What if this is who they really are? Then everything we were taught was a lie, she replied. About them. About us. About what we were doing and why. If they're showing us humanity while our own people enslaved us. What does that mean? I didn't have an answer, but I knew the question would haunt me for the rest of my life. In the darkness, someone else spoke. A younger woman, maybe 20. They called me by my name today, she said, voice full of wonder. The nurse asked my name, and I told her, and she used it. She called me Akiko, not number 12. Akiko. They asked my name too, another woman added. They wrote it down. Like it mattered. Like I mattered. One by one, we shared the same revelation. The Americans had treated us like people. They'd asked our names. They'd sought our consent for medical care. They'd given us food without expecting payment. They'd promised safety and seemed to mean it. For 4 years, we'd been numbers, objects, things to be used. In one day, enemy soldiers had treated us with more humanity than our own countrymen had shown in all that time. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if we could ever go home, or what home would even mean after this. I didn't know if the kindness would last, or if this was an anomaly that would end when different commanders took over. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had survived. I had a name. And for the first time in 4 years, someone had treated me like a human being. That was something. That was everything. August 25th, 1945. Allied Repatriation Center, Rabaul. 1 week. 7 days since the Americans had found us. 7 days of regular meals, medical care, clean clothes, and the strange experience of being treated like people instead of property. 7 days of slowly remembering what it felt like to have a name, to make choices, to exist as something more than a number. But 7 days wasn't enough to erase 4 years. Not nearly enough. I sat in the shade of a canvas shelter, watching other former comfort women go through similar processes of adjustment, some eating slowly, savoring food they didn't have to earn through degradation. Others staring into space, minds still trapped in survival mode. A few talking quietly, tentatively forming bonds with women they'd lived beside for years, but never been allowed to know as people. We were all trying to figure out the same impossible question. What came next? August 25th, 1945. They tell us we can go home. But can you go home to a place that sent you away to this? Can you return to a family that might reject you for what you were forced to become? Is home still home after everything? The repatriation center was organized with military efficiency, but operated with unexpected compassion. The Americans and Australians running it seemed genuinely committed to helping us recover enough to survive the journey back to Japan. And whatever awaited us there. The center occupied what had been a Japanese military compound, now repurposed into a humanitarian operation. Rows of canvas tents provided shelter. A field kitchen operated continuously, producing meals 3 times daily. The medical tent never closed, staffed by rotating teams of doctors and nurses who treated everything from malnutrition to tropical diseases to wounds that had never healed properly. There were approximately 200 Japanese nationals at the center when we arrived, former soldiers awaiting repatriation, civilian workers who'd been stranded when supply lines collapsed, administrators who'd served the occupation government, and us, 15 women who'd been enslaved in the comfort women system. We were kept somewhat separate from the general population, partly for our protection, partly for our privacy. The Allied command seemed to understand that we'd need space, support, and safety to begin processing what we'd survived. Sergeant Miller continued to oversee our section, checking in daily, ensuring our needs were met. He approached supervision with a combination of military organization and genuine human concern that felt entirely new to us. Each morning, he'd walk through our area, greeting us by name, asking if we needed anything, ensuring the Australian nurses had adequate supplies. Corporal Yamada served as translator and informal counselor, bridging the language and cultural gaps with patient understanding. He was Japanese American, born in California to immigrant parents, raised between 2 cultures, drafted into U.S. military service despite his family being sent to internment camps. His position was complicated, his empathy profound. "I understand being caught between worlds," he told me one afternoon. "Not fully American to Americans, not fully Japanese to Japanese. It's lonely, but it also gives perspective. You see both sides clearly because you don't fully belong to either." His words resonated. We were women caught between worlds, too. Japanese women brutalized by Japanese men, saved by American men, trying to figure out where we fit in a world that didn't want to acknowledge what had happened to us. On the 8th day, Miller gathered us for what he called a briefing, information about what would happen next. "Transport ships are being organized," Yamada translated. "Within 2 to 3 weeks, you'll be able to return to Japan. You'll be taken to Allied processing centers there, given documentation, and released to return to your families or find new situations if that's preferable." Released. Return to families. The words should have brought joy. Instead, they brought anxiety. "What will they tell people?" one woman asked quietly. "About us. About what we were." Miller's expression grew serious. "Officially, you'll be documented as displaced persons affected by the war. Your records will note that you were held in military facilities but won't specify the nature of that detention unless you choose to disclose it. We understand the stigma you might face. We're trying to give you as much privacy as possible. Will our families know?" Another woman pressed. "Only what you choose to tell them," Miller said. "But I want to be honest with you. There are already stories circulating in Japan about the comfort women system. Some details are becoming public knowledge. You may face judgment, shame, or rejection from people who don't understand you were victims, not volunteers. I'm sorry. I wish I could promise otherwise." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. We'd survived 4 years of systematic abuse. Now we faced the possibility of spending the rest of our lives being blamed for what had been done to us. "That's not fair," I heard myself saying in English, my limited vocabulary barely adequate to express the rage I felt. Miller looked at me with sad acknowledgement. "No, it's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. But here's what I can tell you. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You're stronger than you know, and there are organizations forming in Japan, women's groups, religious organizations, international aid societies, that understand what happened to you and want to help. You're not alone. You won't be abandoned." I wanted to believe him. But 4 years had taught me that promises from authority figures were usually lies dressed up as reassurance. Still, what choice did we have? We couldn't stay in Rabaul forever. We had to go somewhere. Home was the only option, even if home no longer felt like a place we belonged. Over the following days, I began to notice something unexpected: healing, in small increments. The Australian nurses, Sarah, Margaret, and Elizabeth, did more than treat our physical ailments. They talked to us, listened to us, treated us like people whose stories mattered. Sarah, the oldest of the three, had a daughter my age back in Melbourne. "She's studying to be a teacher," Sarah told me one afternoon while checking the healing progress of nutritional deficiencies. "Wants to work with children who've been traumatized by the war. I think she'd like you. You have the same kind of quiet strength." "I'm not strong," I said. "I just survived." "That's not the same thing." "Surviving is strength," Sarah replied firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You endured 4 years of hell and came out the other side still human, still capable of feeling, still able to hope. That's extraordinary strength." I'd never thought of it that way. Survival had felt like weakness, passive endurance, the inability to fight back or escape. But Sarah framed it as active resistance, as choosing to remain human, despite everything designed to strip that away. "What do I do with that strength?" I asked quietly. "When I go back to Japan, when people judge me, when my own family might turn me away, what do I do with this survival?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, carefully considering her words. "You live, you build whatever life you can. You find others who understand. You refuse to be defined by what was done to you. And maybe, if you're able, you tell your story so that people understand this must never happen again. Tell my story." The idea was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Tell the truth about the comfort women system. Expose the lies and euphemisms. Make people understand we were victims, not volunteers. Prevent this from ever happening to other women. But speaking out meant admitting publicly what I'd been. It meant facing judgment, shame, rejection. It meant reliving trauma every time I told the story. Could I do that? Should I? I didn't know. But the seed had been planted. The days continued in their new routine. Meals 3 times daily. Still strange after years of uncertain, inadequate food. Medical care addressing years of neglect and harm. Clean clothes, though nothing fit quite right. Simple activities. Washing, resting, talking quietly with other women who understood without needing explanation. And slowly, tentatively, we began to reclaim pieces of ourselves we'd buried to survive. One afternoon, I heard singing, soft, tentative, but unmistakably a traditional Japanese folk song from my region. I followed the sound to find Akiko, number 12. I still thought of her, though I was trying to use names now. Sitting in the shade, singing quietly to herself. "I haven't heard that song in years," I said, sitting nearby. She stopped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You didn't disturb. It was beautiful. Reminded me of home. The real home, before everything." Akiko smiled tentatively. "My mother used to sing it while working in the fields. I'd almost forgotten it. Then today, it just came back, like my mind was giving me permission to remember good things again." "Will you sing it again?" I asked. She did, and slowly, other women gathered, listening to a piece of home carried in melody. Some joined in. Some just listened with tears running down their faces. Some smiled. Actual smiles. The first I'd seen in years. It was such a small thing. A song. But it represented something crucial. We were remembering we'd been people before we'd been victims. We'd had lives, identities, cultures, joys. Those things still existed somewhere inside us, buried but not destroyed. The singing became a daily occurrence. Different women would share songs from their regions, lullabies their mothers had sung, work songs from rice harvests, festival songs from celebrations that felt like they'd happened in another lifetime. Music became a bridge between our past selves and our present reality, a way to honor what we'd been without being consumed by what we'd become. Margaret, the nurse with psychological training, noticed the change. "Music is powerful medicine," she told me. "It accesses parts of the brain that trauma can't fully reach. It reminds you that you existed before the trauma, and that you can exist beyond it. The singing sessions also created bonds among us that had been impossible before. In the comfort station, we'd been kept isolated, competitive, prevented from forming real relationships. The system had deliberately divided us to maintain control. Now, without that system, we could actually know each other. I learned that Keiko had been training as a seamstress when she was recruited, that Akiko had 3 younger siblings she'd been trying to support, that Michiko had dreamed of studying literature at university. These weren't just numbers anymore. They were women with histories, dreams, identities that predated and transcended their trauma. We shared memories carefully at first, then more freely, favorite foods we'd eaten before the war, books we'd read, places we'd visited, small joys from ordinary lives that had been extraordinary simply because they were ours. I used to love watching my father make furniture, Keiko said one afternoon. The smell of fresh sawdust, the sound of his plane smoothing wood. He made my mother a chest for her wedding kimono. It was beautiful, inlaid with cherry blossoms. I wonder if it survived the war. My grandmother taught me to write haiku, Michiko added. She said poetry was how we make sense of beauty and pain. I haven't written anything in 4 years. I don't know if I remember how. Maybe we could try, I suggested. Writing together. Not about what happened, but about small things. The way sunlight looks through palm leaves, the taste of real rice, the sound of rain on canvas. Small, beautiful things we can still notice. And we did. Women who'd been reduced to numbers became poets again, documenting tiny moments of beauty amid devastation. The poems weren't sophisticated or polished, but they were ours. Proof that we could still create, still observe, still find meaning in existence beyond mere survival. After the singing, we talked more freely than we'd ever been able to before. Shared memories of home, families, dreams we'd had before the war. Some talked about wanting to return to those dreams. Others acknowledged those dreams were dead, and they'd need to find new ones. I wanted to be a teacher, I admitted, before they recruited me. I was good at mathematics. I thought I'd teach at a girls' school, help other young women get education. Can you still do that? Akiko asked. I don't know. Would anyone let someone like me teach their daughters? Would parents trust me after what I was? But you didn't choose it, another woman, Keiko interjected. You were forced. You were deceived. That's not your fault. Fault and blame don't always align with truth, I said quietly. People will judge. Society will reject. That's reality. Then society needs to change, Keiko said with unexpected fierceness. We need to make people understand what really happened. That we're victims. That the system needs to be exposed and destroyed so it never happens again. It was the same thought Sarah had planted. The same impossible, terrifying, necessary idea. But how? How did we make people understand? How did we overcome shame, our own and society's, to tell truths that no one wanted to hear? September 2nd, 1945, VJ Day. The formal Japanese surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The war was officially, ceremonially over. Throughout the repatriation center, there was subdued acknowledgement of the moment's significance. For the Americans and Australians, it meant going home. Mission accomplished, victory achieved, loved ones waiting. For us, it meant something more complicated. The war that had destroyed our lives was over. But the consequences would last forever. Sergeant Miller gathered us that evening, along with Corporal Yamada for translation. I wanted to speak to you all together, Miller began, because I don't know when I'll have another chance. My unit is being reassigned. I'm heading back to the States within the week. A ripple of anxiety went through the group. Miller had been consistent, trustworthy, a bridge between our trauma and recovery. His departure felt like losing protection. I know you're worried, he continued, reading our reactions, but I want you to know. The medical staff will continue your care. The repatriation process will continue. You're not being abandoned. And I want to say something I should have said sooner. He paused, struggling with emotion. What happened to you was wrong. It was criminal. It was a betrayal of every principle of human decency. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know an apology from a random American sergeant means almost nothing. But I'm sorry that the world let this happen to you. I'm sorry you had to survive what you survived. And I'm sorry that the fight isn't over, that you'll have to keep surviving judgment and shame and all the unfair consequences of other people's crimes." He took a breath. "But I also want you to know, you're some of the strongest people I've ever met. You survived 4 years of systematic dehumanization and came out the other side still capable of kindness, still capable of hope, still fundamentally human. That's extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone reduce you to what was done to you. You're more than that. You've always been more than that." Yamada translated, his own voice thick with emotion. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Then Akiko spoke, voice trembling but clear. "Thank you for treating us like people, for calling us victims instead of criminals, for giving us back our names. We won't forget, and we wouldn't. Whatever came next, whatever judgment and shame and difficulty awaited us in Japan, we would remember that enemy soldiers had treated us with more humanity than our own military had shown. That truth would be complicated to carry, but it would also be undeniable." September 15th, 1945. The day came for our departure. A transport ship had arrived, one of many ferrying Japanese nationals back to the homeland. We were among hundreds of passengers, former soldiers, civilian workers, administrators, families, all of us returning to a Japan we barely recognized. We boarded in the early morning, carrying small bags with the few possessions we'd been given. Clean clothes, basic toiletries, some medical supplies, and official documentation identifying us as displaced persons. As the ship pulled away from Rabaul, I stood at the railing watching the island disappear. 4 years of my life had happened there. 4 years of being number 9. 4 years of dehumanization, so systematic I'd almost forgotten I was Hanako Tanaka. But I remembered now. I had a name. I had survived. And whatever came next, I would face it as a person, not a number. The voyage took 10 days. We were given adequate food, clean sleeping quarters, and basic respect, treatment that still felt strange after years of the opposite. Many of the women stayed below deck, avoiding interaction with other passengers who might judge if they knew our history. But I spent time on deck, watching the ocean, thinking about the future. The ship was a converted military transport, now ferrying civilians back to a Japan nobody quite knew how to imagine. The passengers were a mix of former occupation personnel, civilian workers, and people like us, displaced persons trying to return to lives that might no longer exist. The ocean itself was vast and indifferent, which I found oddly comforting. It didn't judge, didn't demand anything, just existed, rolling and moving according to its own rhythms, unconcerned with human suffering or joy. I'd stand at the railing for hours, watching waves and thinking about what awaited me in Japan. Would my parents still be alive? Had our house survived? Would my younger siblings even remember me? And most importantly, would they accept me if they knew the truth? Other passengers gradually became familiar faces. An elderly couple who'd run a small shop in Rabaul before evacuation. A young man, maybe 20, who'd been conscripted into labor service and was returning home missing his left hand from an accident. A middle-aged woman who'd been a school teacher in the occupation administration and now faced uncertain judgment for having worked for the military government. We were all carrying different forms of shame, different fears about returning home. On the 3rd day, I noticed a young woman, maybe my age, also standing at the railing for long periods. She was thin like all of us, with a haunted quality in her eyes I recognized. On the 4th day, she approached me hesitantly. "You're one of them, aren't you?" she said quietly in Japanese. One of the comfort women. Fear spiked through me. Here it was, the judgment, the exposure I'd been dreading. "How did you—" I started. "I was a nurse," she said. "Forced labor in a military hospital. I saw what they did. I saw the women brought in injured or sick, the way the soldiers treated them, the way the officers documented everything as if it was legitimate medical work." Her voice broke. I knew what was happening, and I did nothing to stop it. I couldn't. I was terrified. But I knew. She was crying now, tears running down her face. "I'm so sorry. I saw and I said nothing and I did nothing and I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to rage at her. You knew and did nothing. But I also understood. Fear was universal. Powerlessness was universal. She'd been trapped in the same system, just in a different role. You're not responsible for what the military did, I said finally. You were a prisoner too, in your own way. We all were. But I should have what? Resisted and been killed? Refused and been replaced by someone else? The system was bigger than any of us. You survived. I survived. That's what matters now. She looked at me with desperate hope. Do you really believe that? I'm trying to, I admitted. Some days I do, some days I don't. But I think the alternative, carrying guilt for things we couldn't control, will destroy us as surely as the war tried to. We talked for hours after that. She told me about the hospital, about treating soldiers who'd been brutalized by their own officers, about witnessing cruelty that made her question everything she'd been taught about Japanese honor and dignity. I thought we were the civilized ones, she said. I believed the propaganda about our superior spirit, our noble cause. Then I saw what our military actually did. To other Asians, to our own people, to women. And I realized we'd been lied to about everything. So what do we do now? I asked. With that knowledge? With all we've seen? I don't know, she admitted. But maybe we start by telling the truth. Not the propaganda version. The real version. The uncomfortable, shameful, difficult truth. It was the same conclusion Sarah, the nurse, had suggested. The same impossible task. But maybe it was the only task that mattered. On the 7th day, another passenger approached. An older woman, maybe 50, who'd been a civilian administrator on one of the occupied islands. She'd watched me for days before speaking. You were one of them, weren't you? She said quietly in Japanese. One of the comfort women. Fear spiked through me. Here it was. The judgment, the shame, the rejection. Yes, I said quietly, preparing for condemnation. Instead, she bowed deeply. I'm sorry. I worked in administration. I saw the paperwork, the quotas, the systematic organization of it. I knew what was happening, and I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that I was just processing papers. But I knew, and I'm sorry I didn't try to help. I stared at her, unable to respond. When we get back to Japan, she continued, there will be people who judge you, who blame you, who pretend you chose this. But there will also be people who know the truth, who understand you were victims of a criminal system. Please don't let the judgment silence you. The truth needs to be told. The system needs to be exposed. You're the only ones who can do that. She bowed again and walked away, leaving me shaking with emotions I couldn't name. This stranger, this administrator who'd been complicit through inaction, was asking me to speak, to tell the truth, to ensure the horror was documented and understood. Could I do that? Should I? The question followed me for the remaining days of the voyage. September 25th, 1945. Yokohama Port, Japan. The ship docked in a harbor surrounded by devastation. Yokohama had been firebombed repeatedly during the war. The port still functioned, but the city beyond was a wasteland of rubble and temporary shelters. This was home. Defeated, occupied, destroyed, but home. We disembarked into chaos. Allied personnel processing returning Japanese nationals, aid organizations trying to provide support, Japanese officials attempting to maintain order. Everyone was thin, ragged, traumatized in one way or another. We were separated into groups for processing. As displaced persons, we were directed to a special section where our documentation was checked, and we were given information about resources available to us. An American officer, through a Japanese translator, explained our options. You can request assistance finding family members. You can be directed to displaced persons shelters if you have nowhere to go. You can receive referrals to medical care or aid organizations. What do you need? What did I need? I needed a time machine to go back 4 years and refuse to leave my village. I needed my innocence back. I needed the world to be fair. I need to find my family. I said instead, in Kumamoto Prefecture. I need to know if they survived. The officer made notes. We'll help you make contact. It may take time. Communication is difficult right now. But we'll try. In the meantime, do you have somewhere to stay? I didn't. My family home was hundreds of miles away. I had no money, no connections, no resources. There's a shelter run by an international aid organization, the translator offered. They're specifically helping women in your situation. Would you like a referral? In my situation. Euphemism for comfort women. At least here, it was acknowledged without judgment. Yes, I said. Please. The shelter was a converted school building in what remained of Yokohama. It housed about 50 women, former comfort women from various locations, all trying to figure out how to rebuild lives from rubble and trauma. It was run by a Japanese woman named Yamada-san, no relation to Corporal Yamada, who'd spent the war years in international relief work and returned to Japan specifically to help us. You're safe here, she told us on arrival. You won't be judged. You won't be exploited. This is a space for healing, for processing what happened, and for planning what comes next. Stay as long as you need. And the shelter was basic but clean, tatami mat sleeping areas, communal bathing facilities, a kitchen that operated on donated supplies, a common room where we could gather. It was poverty by any measure, but it was also the first place since leaving my village where I'd felt truly safe. Yamada-san herself was remarkable. In her 50s, educated before the war, she'd worked with Christian relief organizations throughout Asia. She'd seen firsthand what the war had done to women across the occupied territories. Chinese women in Nanjing, Korean women forcibly taken, Filipino women brutalized during occupation, and now, returning Japanese women who'd been enslaved by their own military. What happened to you is part of a pattern, she explained during one of the group sessions she organized. Systematic sexual violence as a tool of war. It happened to Chinese women in Nanjing, to Korean women throughout the occupation, to Filipino and Indonesian women. And it happened to Japanese women like you. The details differ, but the pattern is the same. Military systems that dehumanize women and treat them as supplies to be used and discarded. She was documenting everything, taking testimonies from women willing to share their stories, creating records that she hoped would eventually be used for accountability. Right now, nobody wants to hear this, she admitted. Japan wants to move forward, forget the shameful parts of the war. The Allies are focused on prosecuting major war criminals, not investigating systematic sexual slavery. But someday, maybe not soon, maybe not in our lifetimes, people will ask what really happened. And when they do, these records will exist. Your stories will exist. The truth will be available. Some women refused to give testimony. The shame was too deep, the fear too great. But others found relief in telling their stories, in having someone believe them, document them, treat them as true, rather than dismissing them as exaggeration or propaganda. I gave my testimony on a gray October afternoon, 3 weeks after arriving at the shelter. Yamada-san sat across from me, pen and paper ready, expression patient and non-judgmental. Start wherever feels right, she said. You don't have to tell me everything. Just what you're comfortable sharing. I started with the recruitment, the lies I'd been told, the promises that had seemed so legitimate. Then the journey to Rabaul. Then, haltingly, carefully, I described the system without going into details that would traumatize us both. The quotas, the medical inspections, the bureaucratic organization of exploitation, the way it had all been made official and legitimate through paperwork and military protocols. They made it a system, I said. Not individual crimes, but a system. Organized, funded, staffed, documented. That's what made it so terrible. The banality of it. The way they turned human beings into resources to be managed and allocated. Yamada-san wrote everything down, occasionally asking clarifying questions, never pushing for more than I offered. Thank you, she said when I finished. I know that was difficult, but your testimony matters. It's evidence, and evidence can eventually become justice. Will there be justice? I asked doubtfully. I don't know, she admitted honestly. Probably not soon. Maybe not ever. But there will at least be truth. Truth that can't be denied or rewritten. That's something. The shelter provided more than just documentation services. Yamada-san had connections with various organizations, medical clinics that provided free care, job training programs that didn't ask too many questions about recent history, even some lawyers who helped women navigate the complex bureaucracy of post-war Japan. She also brought in speakers, women who'd survived different traumas, activists working for women's rights, even a few sympathetic journalists who were beginning to investigate the comfort women's system despite official discouragement. One speaker was a Korean woman who'd survived being taken to a comfort station in China. Her Japanese was accented but clear, her story horrifyingly familiar. "I was 14 when they took me," she said. "Told my parents I'd be working in a factory. Ended up in Manchuria. 3 years. Then the war ended. Russians came. Chaos. Eventually made it back to Korea. But my family, they blamed me, said I'd brought shame. I had to leave my village." She looked at all of us. "I tell you this not to make you more sad, but to make you understand. We are not alone. This happened to women across Asia. Japanese women, Korean women, Chinese women, Filipino women. Different nationalities, same system. If we want justice, we need to work together. The governments that did this to us will try to divide us by nationality. We can't let them." It was a radical idea. That victims should find solidarity across national lines. That what united us, being women systematically exploited by military forces, mattered more than what divided us, nationality, ethnicity, language. But it also made sense. The military hadn't cared about our individual identities when they enslaved us. Why should we let national identity divide us now? Yamada-san also brought in a doctor who specialized in trauma. She explained gently that what we'd experienced would have lasting effects, physical and psychological, that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others, that we should be patient with ourselves. "You survived something that should have destroyed you," she said during a group session. "The fact that you're sitting here, alive, functional enough to think about the future, that's extraordinary. Don't expect yourself to be normal. What you experienced wasn't normal. Give yourself time. Give yourself grace." Over the following weeks, I began to process what had happened in ways I'd been unable to while it was happening. The grief, the rage, the shame, the confusion, all of it poured out in waves I couldn't control. Some days I cried for hours. Some days I felt nothing at all. Some days I wanted to scream at every person who'd ever called us comfort women instead of slaves. Some days I just wanted to disappear, but slowly, gradually, I also began to reclaim pieces of myself. I remembered I'd been good at mathematics. I remembered I'd loved reading. I remembered I'd wanted to teach. Those parts of me still existed, buried under trauma but not destroyed. October 15th, 1945. The message came through Allied communication networks. My family had been located. They'd survived the war. They were living in our village, damaged but intact. They wanted me to come home. I held the paper with shaking hands, reading it over and over. They wanted me home. They'd accepted the referral contact. They knew I was alive, and they wanted me back. But did they know what I'd been? Did they understand? Would they still want me if they knew the truth? "You should go," Yamada-san said gently. "Family is important, and you won't know how they'll react until you try." "What if they reject me?" I asked. "Then you come back here. You have a place here for as long as you need it. But give them a chance. Give yourself a chance." The journey to Kumamoto took 3 days by train and foot through a devastated landscape. Everywhere I looked, destroyed cities, makeshift shelters, people struggling to survive. This was what war had done to Japan. This was what our military's ambitions had created. The trains ran sporadically, often delayed by damaged infrastructure or fuel shortages. I traveled with whatever meager belongings I'd accumulated, a change of clothes, some basic toiletries, the documentation identifying me as a displaced person, and a letter from Yamada-san explaining I was under her organization's protection, should anyone question my circumstances. I sat in third-class cars with other displaced people. Everyone thin, everyone exhausted, everyone carrying visible and invisible scars. We didn't talk much. The fatigue of survival was too great for casual conversation. Through the train windows, I watched Japan pass by in various states of destruction. Some cities were completely gone, just rubble fields where buildings had stood. Others showed patchwork reconstruction, temporary structures rising among ruins. Everywhere people were working, rebuilding, trying to reclaim ordinary life from chaos. At night, I stayed in public shelters or stations, surrounded by other homeless, displaced people. The sleeping arrangements were communal and offered zero privacy, but they were free and relatively safe. I learned to sleep lightly, to keep my few possessions close, to maintain the hypervigilance that had become second nature. On the second day, I shared a train compartment with an older woman who was also traveling to Kumamoto. She started talking unprompted, needing to share her story with someone, anyone. "I'm going to see if my son survived," she said. "He was conscripted in 1944, sent to the Philippines. I haven't heard from him since before the surrender. But I have to know. I have to try to find him." "I hope you find him," I said sincerely. "Where are you traveling from?" she asked. "Yokohama," I said carefully. "I was working overseas during the war. Just got repatriated." "Overseas? Where?" "Rabaul, Papua New Guinea." "What kind of work?" "The moment of truth. I could lie, evade, deflect. Or I could test how people would react to the truth. I was in the comfort women system," I said quietly. The woman's expression shifted. Shock, then pity, then something harder to read. She was silent for a long moment. "That's terrible," she finally said. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. Not, 'I'm sorry you did that.' Not, 'How shameful.' But 'I'm sorry that happened to you.' Recognition that it had been done to me. Not something I had chosen. Thank you," I said, surprised by the response. "My neighbor's daughter was taken too," the woman continued. "They told her family she'd be working as a nurse. She came back last month. Her parents accepted her back, but some neighbors, they've been cruel, calling her names, saying she brought shame to the family." "That's what I'm afraid of," I admitted. "Then your neighbors are fools," the woman said firmly. "You girls were used by the military, then blamed for being used. It's not right. Anyone with sense can see that." Her words gave me courage. Not everyone would judge. Some people understood. Maybe I could survive the shame after all. When I finally reached my village on the third day, walking the last kilometers because no transport went that far, I was exhausted physically and emotionally. The countryside showed less dramatic destruction than the cities. No firebombing here. But there was neglect, poverty, the signs of a nation that had devoted everything to war and had nothing left for basic maintenance. When I finally reached my village, I barely recognized it. Buildings damaged, fields neglected, the population noticeably thinner than I remembered, but familiar landmarks remained. The old shrine, the bend in the river, the hill where I'd played as a child, and our house. Still standing, though needing repairs. I stood at the edge of our property for a long time, gathering courage. This was it. This was the moment of truth. I could turn around, go back to the shelter in Yokohama, build a new life among strangers who understood. Or I could step forward, knock on the door, face whatever awaited me. I chose forward. My mother answered my knock. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the threshold. I was older, thinner, carrying trauma she could probably see. She was grayer, more worn, carrying her own weight of survival. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Hanako," she whispered, as if afraid I'd disappear if she spoke too loudly. "Yes, Mother." "I'm home." Then she ran to me, pulling me into her arms, sobbing my name over and over. "Hanako, Hanako, you're alive. You came home." I collapsed in her arms, 4 years of held grief finally breaking free. She held me while I cried, while I shook, while I let out all the pain I'd been carrying. We talked for hours. I told her everything, the deception, the truth about what comfort women really were, the 4 years of systematic abuse, the American liberation, the slow process of recovery. I waited for judgment, for rejection, for shame. Instead, my mother held my hands and cried. "They lied to us. They said you'd be safe. They took you and they lied and they hurt you, and I should have known. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known," I said. "They lied to everyone. It was systematic, organized. How could any of us have known? But you're home now," my mother said. "You're alive. You survived. That's what matters." My father was quieter, more awkward with emotion. But he bowed to me, formally, deeply, and said, "You brought honor to this family by surviving. Welcome home, daughter." My younger siblings stared with a mixture of awe and confusion. They'd been children when I left. Now they were teenagers who'd survived their own war experiences. We were strangers who would have to learn to be family again. But we could try. We would try. I stayed in my village for 2 months, relearning how to be part of a family, part of a community. Some neighbors were welcoming. Others whispered and judged. Some understood I was a victim. Others blamed me for bringing shame to the village. I learned to ignore the judgment, learned to focus on the people who understood, learned to carry my truth with dignity instead of shame. And I learned something else. I wasn't alone. Across Japan, thousands of women were returning from comfort stations, facing similar struggles, trying to rebuild similar lives. We were scattered, isolated, often ashamed to speak. But we existed. In December, I received a letter from Yamada-san at the shelter. She was organizing a support network for former comfort women, a way to connect us, share resources, and eventually maybe advocate for recognition and justice. We can't change what happened, she wrote, but we can ensure it's documented, acknowledged, and never repeated. That starts with us telling our stories, on our terms, when we're ready. I wrote back immediately. I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to help. I wanted to transform my survival into something meaningful. 1952. Tokyo, Japan. I am 30 years old. I work as a bookkeeper for a small business in Tokyo. The mathematics skills I'd developed before the war proving useful in post-war reconstruction. It's not teaching, but it's honest work that uses my mind. I live in a boarding house with other single women. Some know my history. Some don't. Those who know don't judge. We're all survivors of war in one way or another, all rebuilding lives from various kinds of rubble. Once a month I meet with a support group of former comfort women. We number about 20 in Tokyo, a fraction of the thousands who survive nationwide. We talk. We support each other. We strategize about how to get our stories acknowledged. It's slow work. Most of Japan wants to forget the war, not examine its darkest corners. The government denies the systematic nature of the comfort women system. Society prefers to believe we were prostitutes who volunteered rather than victims who were enslaved. But we persist. We document. We testify when anyone will listen. We refuse to be erased. Last week I testified to an International War Crimes Investigation Committee. They asked me to describe the system, how I was recruited, what the conditions were, how the military organized and operated it. I told them everything, in precise detail, hiding nothing. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than surviving 4 years in Rabaul, harder than facing my family, harder than rebuilding a life, but it was also necessary, because Sergeant Miller was right. I survived something that should have destroyed me. I reclaimed my name when they tried to reduce me to a number. I remained human when they tried to make me a thing. And now I was using that survival to ensure the truth wouldn't be buried, wouldn't be forgotten, wouldn't be reduced to euphemisms that hid crimes behind comfortable lies. I am Hanako Tanaka. I was deceived, enslaved, dehumanized. I was also liberated by enemy soldiers who treated me better than my own military had. I survived. I exist. I matter. And I will never stop telling that truth. If this story moved you, if it challenged what you thought you knew about World War IIs, about victims and perpetrators, about who deserves humanity, please subscribe, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is one of the hardest stories from Rabaul to tell, but also one of the most important. The comfort women system was real. The suffering was real. The women who survived are real, and their stories deserve to be heard and believed. In a world that still struggles with how we treat victims of systematic abuse, these lessons remain urgent. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. And please, share this story so others can understand what happened and why it must never happen again. See you in the next one.